Welcome to another episode of Presbyterian and Reformed Texas. Welcome today, folks. We have a wonderful episode. We have a different episode this morning for you. We have Joshua Torrey returning, ruling elder from Austin, Texas, Redeemer Austin. Joining Joshua and myself, we have Jason Piland. Now, Jason's not a Texan. He's from Top. He is from the Ohio Presbytery. Welcome, Jason. How are you?
I am well, Eric. It is an honor to be on with you, and I'm grateful that you are going beyond the bounds of Texas. I'm not sure what your listeners are going to think of that, but it's an honor to be with you on this podcast today. Thanks for the invite.
Well, we're glad to have you here. As Fred Greco has already set the standard for hyping Michigan, we figured better have somebody from Ohio on to help
there you go.
balance the Big Ten listeners out. So
that's right.
Just reset where what you do. You're a ruling elder there at Redeemer Austin.
So I'm ruling elder here at Redeemer Austin. Been so for coming up on 5 years later this year. Lifetime in the church, but only been in the PCA for about 10 years. I'm a computer chip designer by trade, but very early in my career, I almost went into seminary, and so serving the church has always been very important to me and my wife. We're both the offspring of retired SBC pastors, so church ministry has always been ingrained in us. And so I've tried to use whatever skill sets I have to help the service of the church. I think the greatest contribution thus far to the PCA that I have been able to produce has been the spreadsheet tracking the BCO amendments with Scott Edberg. That's my claim to fame, is being his Excel or Google Sheet formula lackey.
Yep, you've done excellent work there with him on that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Jason, you're in Hudson, Ohio. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
And that's a suburb of Akron?
It is. It's kind of between Akron and Cleveland. So it's a little bit closer to Akron, but kind of regionally it's connected to Cleveland. And there's historically it's been a bedroom community, and historically a lot of kind of was formed with a lot of executives who are in Cleveland, manufacturing different Cleveland companies were here in Hudson and would commute up to Cleveland every day. It used to be a train that ran every day from Hudson to Cleveland. No longer exists, but yeah. So it's a suburb that really services both cities, and has become its own community in its own right as well.
Very cool. And your church is pastored by Scott Wright, which, if listeners have been following along, Jim Cassidy, who was on our last episode, he recommended Dr. Wright's book on regeneration and redemptive history on the last episode. So, kind of an interesting tie-in and timing on that.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, they at Reform Forum published that work of his, I believe, last fall.
Yeah.
So yeah, recommend that for sure.
Definitely. And you serve as an associate pastor there at your church, both Redeemer churches, right? You're Redeemer Hudson, and
that's right.
Joshua,
we're just
Austin.
Redeemer Church.
That's right.
Just Redeemer Church. No Presbyterian in the name. I wasn't here when that decision was made, but that's where we are.
That's where you are. Fair enough. And you've actually served at the General Assembly on Review of Presbyterian Records and Constitutional Business, CCB.
That's right. Yeah, our presbytery appointed me. I'm a couple of terms now onto RPR, so I've been able to do that. And then the GA, was it 2 summers ago, elected me to Committee on Constitutional Business, and so I've been able to serve there and currently serve as the secretary. I'm glad to serve in that capacity.
Very
and
good.
Then at the presbytery level, I've been the stated clerk for about a year now of our presbytery.
So you're a busy man.
So there's a lot, hands in a lot of pots right now.
Yes, there are. And Joshua, you serve at the Presbyterian level as well, right, beside your local church?
Yes. Yeah. I served with Jason on RPR last year.
Mm-hmm. And you did overtures also, right?
And I did overtures last year. Yes. Yeah. And then at the presbytery level, I'm the chair of our nominating committee, which means I serve on our admin committee as well.
Right.
And then I'm on our credentials committee that examines men. So
yeah,
lots to do for presbytery.
That's right. And that your role in that examining committee obviously feeds right into the discussion today on the overtures.
It does.
So again, you were the primary crafter of an overture that passed South Texas Presbytery a year ago, went to General Assembly, the overtures committee, at the time decided, hey, this probably needs some more work. We're going to send it back to South Texas Presbytery to continue to work on it. And so it never came to the floor at General Assembly last year in Memphis.
It came as part of the omnibus,
right,
approval of what the committee had recommended.
Correct.
Yeah. So it didn't get any discussion on the floor.
No discussion about it. So Jason, how did you get involved in the discussion of the overture last year? Because I understand that you were eager right away to start working on perfecting this and helping and Joshua towards that. So,
well, it's funny. Last night I was trying to figure out, how did I even get a part of this? How did Joshua and I get connected? And I went back and realized there was a tweet thread after GA last year, and I just threw out kind of 2 cents on ways that it could be improved for next year, and threw out some ideas. And then quickly Joshua and I started DMing, and then that turned into emails, and it progressed from there.
Right.
And we started working together and collaborating. And so it was really just kind of just a couple comments that I made on Twitter that led us starting down this path.
It's interesting you say that, because that is almost parallel, right, Joshua, to your experience with Scott Edberg and the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And there might be a good lesson here for all of us in here if we're quick to if we're not quick to respond negatively to a brother online. Maybe there's something that can come about of the dialogue and discussions that take place there.
Absolutely. I'm not particularly keen on the way Twitter is being run these days, and the ads have gotten ridiculous. But there's the opportunity for cross fellowship and engagement is really high when used properly.
Yeah, no doubt. So, okay, so the overture itself, what is it trying to accomplish? What is the goal that we set about, or that you said about a year ago, in the continuing work in this cycle? What are you trying to accomplish?
I think the summary can be mandatory background checks for all ordained officers in the PCA.
Mm-hmm.
So this is including ruling elders and deacons. This is including teaching elders or candidates who are coming forward for ordination to be a teaching elder transferring over into another presbytery, having a background check run on them. And even for ordained men ordained outside of the PCA who are transferring into the
mm-hmm.
PCA, background checks on them as well. So the idea is that background checks would be a supplement to the character examinations that are already required by our BCO. The background checks would just be an additional piece of information that we are asking the church courts to look at when doing a character exam of a man.
Very good. And it's like you said it right. It's a natural extension of the character discussion to better understand who this man is. Does he meet the qualifications that are laid out in Scripture? And I think what's interesting in my mind is there is a broad call for these background checks. I think there's broad support for it now that the language and exactly how it's implemented, I think there's some discussion on it. Has been some discussion. That was one of the reasons it, was sent back a year ago. but there's been a broad desire to see something like this occur from all interested parties within the denomination. In some respects, somewhat different than the work that we're just about to complete now in the 3 years cycle of trying to better examine a man in regards to notorious sins, particularly around issues of sexuality. But really, as we have gone through the cycle and perfected it, really is specifying it. We are looking at notorious sins. We're not just picking out the sexuality angle. It is is a man leading the life that is indicative of a follower of Christ in an exemplary manner. And I applaud your desire to see us use the tools available to us to better accomplish that task.
Yeah, and to that end, you mentioned revisions coming out of GA. I got laughed at because I quite literally began working on revisions on the plane ride home. I was logged in and I was doing edits. And I originally came to the idea that there were 3 or 4 different revision paths that could be taken for this overture. And I'll let Jason kind of expand on his original thoughts, because his original thoughts eventually became like the main revision. And every time I was tweaking other revisions, I was pulling strands from the revision I was working on with Jason to the point where I stopped working on all the other revisions, and the one Jason and I were working on became the revision that y'all will see hopefully on the GA website here pretty soon, the official language,
right,
as stated by the clerk. But I'd like Jason to kind of explain what he was thinking, because it's ultimately a description of the final product.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the issues last year, there just wasn't clarity. How is the background check to be used by the courts? When they did it, okay, I think the language was they shall cause to be conducted a background check or something to that effect. But it wasn't clear. Okay, what do we do with it? Is it now creating a separate exam altogether?
Right.
And it's pass fail based on the report that comes back. And my suggestion was, hey, this is really part of character, and this needs to be additional data that goes into considering Christian character and whether somebody's qualified for the office or not. And I think that tact has worked. Now it's kind of difficult and clunky, and how do you actually get it into the text of the BCO that way? And I think we've done the best we could. We've gone through lots and lots of revisions. How do we think through the easiest way, the simplest way to streamline the language and put it into that part of the exams in these 3 different places in the BCO? But that's important because this is not an exam all on its own. We're not creating a new exam, or that's not the intent. The intent is not to say this is a pass-fail thing. This is to get additional data in front of the court as they're examining somebody's character and fitness. And of course, you will probably ask the candidates, will anything show up on your background check? That's kind of an important question to ask. Do you have any history of arrest? Do you have any history of convictions? And that's an important part of this. And you will say, okay, well, why did this happen? And if it happened before they were a believer or happened a long time ago, there's ways to see the data that comes forward, and to not necessarily be disqualifying. But the presbytery needs to know this, or the session needs to know this, and again, keeping it in that category of character exam. One more piece of data. This is not creating something extra, another exam, something else. And the presbytery has the right to weigh this however they want, to consider it in whatever light they want. So for me, that was a big piece coming out of last year is what do we do with it? How do we weigh it? How do we consider it? And then the other question really is, what background check? Who says? How do you handle it? What committees get to see it? Does the whole presbytery get to see it? All of these really naughty questions, and it's hard to untangle. What do you do with that? And what we landed on is we don't think I think this is your view, Joshua, that we don't think the GA should be legislating all those particular details. And every presbytery is going to have different needs and concerns. Some presbyteries are over multiple states and have multiple jurisdictions. Some are part of a state. They have different things going on. Some are more regional, and so you have different concerns in that region than you do in smaller presbyteries that are 3, 4, 5 counties. And so there's different needs and concerns for everyone. Are we going to be doing this over Zoom? Does it have to be in person? All these kinds of questions that relate to how do we receive the exam? How do we, or the background check? How do we talk with the candidate about it? All those procedures. Really what we set up was it shall be done, and the candidate shall be able to respond to it. So we don't want them to be disqualified without them seeing it, without them knowing what's going on behind the scenes. They need to have the right to respond to it, and the presbytery or the session will have great freedom to do this in the way they think is best and wisest in their context. So it was not a wanting to be top heavy, top down, say you must do it this way, you must do this kind of background check, you must have this kind of timeline on it. It was no, let the presbytery figure that out. They need to do the check, and they need to allow the man to respond to it. But other than that, you need to take ownership of this and run with it and figure out what's best and wisest in your context. So I think those are the two big things that I identified June last year, were this needs to be part of your character exam, and then we need presbyteries to take ownership and figure out how they want to do it in their own particular context.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know, like I said, there's obviously broad support for this. Some other brothers in Susquehanna Presbytery have a different version that they've put forward that is already on the PCA website. It's currently Overture 6. Their approach still continues a much more direct top-down language than you're proposing, correct?
Yes, and I'm glad that the brothers worked on it. I think it's a little ironic that the overture that we submitted last year, South Texas, was Overture 6 as well. So there's some parallelism there. I think, to Jason's point, the more we worked on this and got into this mindset as he was describing, I was convinced that the approach we took, which is more grassroots Presbyterianism than the GA telling them how to do it, the more I realized it was already consistent with the existing spirit of the BCO. The spirit of the BCO, when it tells us what trials to give to a man before ordination, it tells us what exams to do, but it doesn't tell us how to do them. So General Assembly doesn't tell us how thorough a BCO exam needs to be, or a church history exam, or a sacraments exam. We leave it up to the local church courts to decide how thorough they're going to have their exams be. And so that existing spirit of trust the courts is already in the BCO. And I think that our overture is in that vein of trusting one another to do the most accurate and thorough background check that is possible. Like Jason mentioned, there are going to be vast differences across different presbyteries that might impact a presbytery's ability to do as thorough of an exam as another presbytery. There could be financial concerns. There could be all kinds of concerns that go back and forth, especially with presbyteries across multiple states. And so I think the wisdom of background checks plus the wisdom of trusting one another is the best approach to strike at this issue, as opposed to a very top-down, this is the check you must do. I don't see that approach being adopted amongst most of the PCA. That kind of top-down enforcement.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that resonates with me in hearing you say, the presbytery has the freedom, or the session has the freedom to craft how they implement this and how they use it. They just must do it. We recently met North Texas Presbytery last weekend, and we continued to work on perfecting minutes of previous presbytery meetings, as we were cited by RPR for, it wasn't clear in minutes, as you can appreciate, Jason, right? It wasn't clear in the minutes how we had examined these men, or not that how that we had examined these men in certain specific areas. So it's not, it's not that you've got a checklist of these 10 things you must do within an exam on church history or in the background check, but it's did you do the background check? Did you examine them church history? Did you examine them a Christian experience? And having, just yes, no, right? We did or we did not examine them. And
that's right. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I think that just goes to Joshua's point that this already fits in the way that we do our exams anyway. This is very consistent. And with that practice, we require certain kinds of papers for teaching elder candidates. We require certain kinds of exams. And this is just another piece that has to be done. And it's not like the General Assembly is going to be reviewing the background check. It's that you did the background check and you handled it according to what you thought was wise and proper.
Yeah. No, that's good. What have you given any thought to how this may play into other areas of the PCA? Like one of the thoughts I had actually listening to your interview with Ryan Beasy, Joshua, was what this means for RUF if the new affiliation agreement comes into play, which more centralizes RUF and really changes that relationship. Does it, how do you see this overture impacting more central agency type things within the PCA?
I haven't thought as thoroughly on that as I probably should have. I know, at least this is my opinion, that RUF is one of the best things that the PCA does, but perhaps it does it too well. And now we're working through how these two successful things are, tied to the hip, and obviously cannot get a divorce. But we got to work through this relationship. So I haven't really given it thought beyond. I think one of the pushbacks on background checks that I've heard, just a generic one, is that it's going to slow down the process of men getting ordained and men transferring into presbyteries and men getting their calls, confirmed. And I could see that also being the case here with RUF. RUF's desire to call men to these positions. I know, from a certain perspective, there's this song and dance with the presbytery, but if the presbytery now is required to do background checks, that could put some brakes and some roadblocks in the path of doing this as efficiently as possible. But other than that, I haven't given much thought to how this would, put a new tone to the relationship.
Yeah, I think it's still this still requires the presbytery as the credentialing body. It still has to do the background check, regardless whatever RUF wants to do. If they want to do their own, that's great. They're able to. That's wonderful. But this still puts the responsibility on the presbytery as it's credentialing, as it's determining the character and the whether a man is fit for ministry. They're still doing that background check. So I think from a presbytery perspective, it's not going to change much, if anything at all, with the relationship with RUF. RUF can decide, okay, is this something that would be helpful for them to see? Or are they doing their own? I don't know RUF and their process well enough. But I don't see this interrupting that relationship in any significant way. Maybe I'm off base and not seeing something, but I think the other discussions that are happening can continue to happen, and this shouldn't affect that all that much.
Yeah, no, that's good. So this overture was presented at the South Texas Presbytery, as you guys met the end of January, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And how did that go?
It went really well. I joked online that the only main question was whether or not I would be serving on overtures to defend it, which I will be serving on overtures. I think, we're South Texas is an interesting cross section of the PCA, because we've got cities, we've got border churches with on the Texas border. We've got a bunch of RUF. We've got college towns and hill country towns and all that stuff in between. And it has been encouraging how universally accepted the idea is. I think that in many ways for this issue, we might actually be a little bit, we could have probably been a little bit more progressive if there had been more input. Some of the men wanted to see us require that background checks be done with regularity, not just one time, but over a certain period of time. And I had to answer those questions about why we didn't include things like that, because, I think everyone can see the wisdom, like you said, everyone can see the wisdom of background checks. And nothing stops a presbytery from in their policy saying, hey, everybody in the presbytery is going to get a background check every 3 to 5 years. Let the presbytery do that. And so reducing the amount of top-down instruction was something that the men heard and received as good direction for this overture, and it passed unanimously at South Texas.
That's awesome. And you guys met in Corpus Christi.
We did.
I saw pictures of you and your family on the beach.
Yes.
Now, Jason, up there in Ohio, do you have Presbyterian meetings on Lake Erie there in Cleveland?
I can't say we do, unfortunately. No, we were as close as we get. We were in Shaker Heights, which is a direct suburb of Cleveland. We were there last time, but in February, no, we're not going anywhere near that lake.
Can't imagine why not, right? One of the perks of the South Texas Presbytery is that you have a beautiful coastline to take advantage of.
Yeah. Jason also had this overture pass in his presbytery, so I'd like to hear from him as well how it went.
Yeah, that was February 3rd. We met again right outside at our church outside of Cleveland, at the Heights Presbyterian Church up there, and this came before the presbytery, and I think being in Ohio, it's interesting. I've been in PCA churches in Nashville, and then involved in PCA there in Charlotte when I was in seminary, and I think it's interesting to be up in Ohio. It's a different feel because we cover about half the state of Ohio, and we have 8 particular churches. And the PCA is not well known. Reformed theology is not something that's very strong in this region. So the PCA up here, we feel a little bit disconnected from the PCA. Our presbytery, we feel like we're a little on the Wild West a little bit. And I'm sure our brothers, out on the west side of the country and some other areas will say, we can still drive to presbytery and they can't. So, it is different. But we have a sense that we aren't very well connected to the PCA. And when this came up, I think that was reflected a little bit in that we've already, so the part of the overture has suggestions, samples for presbyteries and sessions of policies they can adopt to flesh out these particulars. And it's I had suggestions just to give people a ballpark. Hey, this is what's possible. Here's one way you could go with this. And our presbytery has already adopted that. Basically the same thing you see there. Our church has already adopted it. So one of the questions was, so we're already doing this as a presbytery. Do we really need to do this for the denomination? And I think part of that is being here in Ohio and not feeling the weight or the responsibility of being a denominational of the entire denomination. We feel like we're a little bit younger step siblings or something like that. Right. And so the thought was, we have our ducks in a row. If they want to do that, they can, but why do we need to be involved in that? And I'm certainly reading between the lines there, and nobody said these things, but I think that's a general sense of what I got. And the question was, we're doing well. We think this is important here, but presbytery should be able to make that decision themselves, whether this is something that they want to do. And so, and I think that's where the structure of the overture really came into play, and that it's giving maximum freedom to the presbyteries and the sessions to implement this.
Yeah.
And we're not legislating, here's what you must do if this kind of report comes back on a background check. And so there's a lot of freedom. And I think people hear that and see that. And I think also there were, knowing that this matter will be considered by GA this year, Overture 6 will be considered. Part of the question before us was, do we like Overture 6, or do we think this is a better proposal? Or is this better language for the GA? And so there was some debate over that. And we were overwhelmingly in favor of this overture to put forward at GA for various reasons. And one other objection that I think you've received, Joshua, that I've heard other places was, background checks. It's not like a theological paper that you have to submit that costs the presbytery nothing. This actually requires the presbytery to pay something. This is maybe the first thing in the BCO that's requiring that affirmative duty now of paying for something. And now all presbyteries pay for a lot of things, but this is now the BCO mandating that. And I think that came up as well, thinking through, is this wise, again, from top down to mandate presbyteries do this? Maybe if they on their own want to do it, that's great and fine, but we shouldn't be telling other presbyteries that this is what they must do. So, and I think that's a legitimate point, and one that needs to be thought through as this kind of continues through the process.
Yeah. And it is. Go ahead, Joshua. I'm sorry.
I was just going to answer because I have heard that, and the only precedent that even gets close to this similar of a situation is the recommendation that the presbytery pay for men that get sent to the overtures committee in the RAO. There's just a sentence kind of saying the presbytery should do its best to compensate and pay the way of a man if he's going to serve on overtures committee. But I think that's the closest in the BCO or RAO that exists.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure this thought is probably would not be very popular. But if we look at how other organizations implement background checks, I am currently subject to 3 background checks a year, or I guess, at the church at Trinity, I guess we're on a 3-year cycle. But if it was in a given year, I would have a background check at Trinity. I would have a background check for the local school district being a volunteer, and I have a background check from USA Hockey. Now, USA Hockey, I have to pay for that background check. That's probably not a popular thought of saying, candidate, you're going to be asked to pay for this. But, that is an option as well, I would think, depending on how a presbytery or session would structure things, that, it's not out of the realm of possibility, and certainly not out of the ordinary.
It's not. And I'll let Jason kind of respond to this, because I think one of the things that's definitely on my mind as I'm serving on overtures again is that there may be a strong desire to amend the overture to make clear precisely who pays and tie it specifically to the presbytery and to the session. In my opinion, I prefer the language that we're putting forth now, because it does allow for the possibility of a candidate to be the one that's paying for it. But I'd love to hear what Jason has to think about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the intentional ambiguity in the language provides that presbyteries could require the candidate to pay their way, or require their session, or could require, or themselves step up to pay for it. I think the presbytery, the session, will have the ability to make that determination. And at the end of the day, now this depends on the order or the level and how deep the background check is and how many jurisdictions you're looking at. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about hundreds or thousands of dollars for each individual background check.
Right.
And that's where part of the question is, okay, if we needed to background check everybody, that would be a significant outlay, potentially, depending on the size of your presbytery. But we're only dealing with incoming individuals, whether it's teaching elders transferring or new ordinands at the presbytery or session level. It's only new people coming in, so it's not going to be some massive flood of background checks coming through, and they're not prohibitively expensive. We're not talking about, I think you can do, I won't I won't speculate because I've looked at certain numbers in certain contexts. I'm not sure how it'll play for every presbytery.
Sure.
But it's not going to be thousands of dollars per candidate or even hundreds of dollars per candidate.
Right.
So it's not prohibitively expensive. And I think presbyteries will be able to figure out, okay, maybe we can pay half, churches can pay half, figure out a way that works for them, again, in their context. Now, if it comes down and the GA does want clarity, I think clarity is okay. I think if they do want to say the court must pay for it, I think that's okay. What is required here, though, under the language, is the court shall order and review. The court has to be the one ordering it. So what I can't do is what a presbytery can't do is tell a candidate, hey, why don't you go on this website, go order a background check and send it to us so that we can review it. You can't do that. The presbytery has to be the one ordering the background check for all kinds of reasons. I think this is incredibly important and crucial here. We can't even allow sessions to do a background check on a candidate for a pastor and then forward that to the presbytery. I think the language prohibits that and says, no, the presbytery must order it. The presbytery is the one who is determining the parameters, who's the one seeing it and receiving it from the agency that's doing the check. That I think that is crystal clear and needs to continue. The question is, who pays for it? And that is the one piece here that our presbytery actually changed in the sample presbytery policy, because the sample policy, it says that the presbytery shall ordinarily carry the cost. So the background check on this candidate shall ordinarily be at the cost of the presbytery. We got rid of the ordinarily language to say, no, presbytery is going to pay for it because we think that's going to make it easier administratively and all that. And we're not receiving hundreds of background checks at one time. So we think in our context, that makes sense. We're just going to pay for it. We're kind of testing it out in 2024 to see what the costs are actually going to be. We don't know for sure. But once we have a better sense in 2025, we'll build it into our budget and be able to know on a more recurring basis what those expenses will be. So anyway, just a little bit of rambling there on some of those requirements, but the presbytery must do the ordering, but there is ambiguity who pays for it. And the Presbyterian session can set their policy as to what's required in that particular instance.
One of the big impetus behind, I guess there's really two major impetus behind the desire broadly for the PCA to do these background checks would be, number one, our own DASA report, right? The report that came out General Assembly 2 years ago. And the other really would be, I think, a broader cultural phenomenon, particularly in the United States, but it's certainly not unique to the United States, right? With scandal in other churches, and we had the Catholic Church and things that came out in Boston and around the country. We had the Houston Chronicle blowing the big expose on the Southern Baptist convention, and where there were cases of abuse, and men were freely allowed to transfer to other churches, and none of this information was shared. Things were covered up, and guys were just moved on. These background checks are only going to work in the case of actual crimes committed or charges of crimes. I mean, I guess a background check could show someone was arrested and then they, could be acquitted in a court of law, but the arrest still may show in the background check. But let's transition for a second and talk about the bigger picture of church discipline, right? Because I think that really is the bigger piece of this discussion that we're having here today on these background checks or examining the character of a man. If there are issues of abuse, whether they're of a criminal nature or a spiritual nature, churches have an obligation to deal with that if it's occurring in their midst, right? We need to report allegations of a crime. We as the church don't need to be the investigative body. We need to let law enforcement handle it. If there are spiritual issues, we need to deal with that. We can't let men just off scot-free and say, "Hey, he's a good guy. We're gonna cover this up." Right? We're not going to deal with it. Talk about that for a minute. And how do you see the interconnected nature of these issues and what the role of the church really is in needing to exercise discipline as God has taught us in His Word?
That's a big question, Eric. I think one of the things that I return to is when we look at the qualifications for church officers in the scripture, um, it's like 90% character. It's who the man is. And I think that for all of our uh, wonderful emphasis on having great theology in the PCA and wanting to preserve the Reformed tradition of our forefathers, we have just trusted each other and to make sure men have stellar character. But I think when we look through the minutes of GA every year and we see men who have left the ministry, most of them are not for heresy trials. They're over character issues at their local church.
Right.
And I think as a denomination, us saying, hey, we need to take the character of the men who shepherd our flock more seriously. I'm hoping that will move down into those local churches where these shepherds who are having their character examined just that much more thoroughly will carry that concern of character and godliness into their local churches. We've, as you mentioned, this is kind of a continuation of the notorious sin amendments to our Book of Church Order. We are definitely maybe hot spotting specific sins, but we are recognizing that our BCO could be buffed up in this regard to character, and I'm hoping that this will lead to other changes in the rules of discipline and some furthering of education in the PCA on issues of abuse. I hate the idea or the accusation that, it's the tail wagging the dog kind of situation with the society drawing us this way. We more than anybody should understand that the behavior of the leaders of our church, whether that be the ordained officers or just the heads of households, ministry leaders, the spiritual leadership and guidance that's given needs to be above reproach. And my hope is that, background checks are just a tiny step towards us saying, this is what we're committed to. We're committed to our spiritual leaders being above reproach. And my hope is that we can continue to see ways the PCA can expand upon that theme in different aspects of how we organize our churches. Jason?
Yeah, and I think one of the potential dangers of an overture and an amendment like this to the BCO is that people can say, okay, we did our bit and we're done.
Right.
We're doing background checks and we're good now. Because nobody believes background checks are the solution to all these issues. It is, like you said, Joshua, it's a tiny piece. This is very low hanging fruit. This is just easy stuff that we can do to make sure we're not being negligent, to make sure we are doing at least a small amount of due diligence on those who are shepherding the flock of God. And so I think this is important, and I do think there needs to be. I agree that I think we can do better to be more aware of these things. So this will catch legal issues that people have had, but it won't catch a number of other things, a number of other issues. And so transferring between presbyteries, should there be more communication, about that? I don't know. Maybe there's a way to do that well. Without bogging things down, because those are always the competing interests. We want to get the most information out there. We want to make sure everybody knows what's going on, but yet we don't want to slow the process down. We don't want to bog it down. We don't want to just add bureaucratic paperwork to the process just for the sake of paperwork. And of course, so we're trying to balance those things as we go through this. But I agree that this is rather straightforward and easy. And so there needs to be a lot of work done thinking through the bigger picture issues. And I think the DAS report is helpful in that. And the awareness of what other churches are going through, and the fact that, we have historically trusted each other to kind of, he's a good guy and known him for 20 years and, he'd never do that. And I think we're learning we have to be careful. We can't
Right.
just do that. We need to actually really deeply know people. And even when you do that, you're surprised that, wow, I would never have thought he would have been the guy to do this, who would have committed this kind of sin, this kind of abuse. So we need to, I think the Dawson report was a good step in the right direction of helping us be aware of what could be and maybe probably is in many places happening, even in the PCA. And this is one small step forward to help us be aware, help us to be more diligent, and to care for the flock. Yeah, but there's so much more we could say and many more places to go with that.
Yeah.
But I do think this is a helpful first step.
Yeah. Eric, I think, go ahead. I was just going to add, because I think Jason was talking about, the danger of an overture like this being, well, we have it on the books now, so everything is good. And I think it also, another danger of it is that we could run afoul of beginning to treat the BCO like a shepherding manual, which is not what it's made for. And so I think as we continue to talk through this, we're going to have to figure out that there are things that the PCA should be doing and each PCA church should be doing that don't have any business being in the BCO. And I think that's going to be a hard discussion for us to have, is that there's going to be wisdom practices that we should all be doing that the spirit of putting that in the BCO just doesn't make sense. And I'm hopeful that that doesn't come across to the outside world and to the men and women who support these kind of overtures, that the PCA doesn't care. Because it's clearly, it's not going to be the case. If this overture on background checks fails again in Richmond and gets sent back or just gets voted down, that's not going to be because the PCA is full of a bunch of people who want to have rampant abuse, And so I hope that we understand that this is a very touchy crossing point of things we think churches should be doing, and can we put this in the BCO in a reasonable way? And I think putting this overture back out, obviously, Jason and I believe we can do this particular issue in and through the BCO, but I'm not sure that that's going to be the case for every step the PCA needs to take as it fights abuse.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And one, touching on an issue that even after last year's GA, there was immediate decrying the fact that the General Assembly did not require background checks for officers because last year it failed. And immediately saying, look, the PCA doesn't care about victims of abuse. And that's way too simplistic of an understanding of what happened last year, and I think what will be happening going forward. It didn't pass last year because it wasn't as strong as it should have been, and making no change is better than making a bad change.
Yeah.
And so and that's why it wasn't, they didn't say no. They said, hey, let's work on this and let's bring this back next year. The GA did not have the time to craft it last year. The Overtures Committee didn't have the ability to do it. So, and that's okay. That's the way our polity works. And it's slow for a reason. It's taken 3 years for the other, overtures on sexuality to go through in a strong fashion. And that's just that process of improving the language, improving our vision, improving how we implement good ideas into our polity, or like Joshua said, whether it even should be implemented into our policy, or whether this is something that we handle pastorally off the books, as it were. Those are very important distinctions, and we need to keep that in mind as we're walking through this process and thinking about abuse generally.
Yep. No, well said. One thing that is on the books, right, is the discipline process. And I think, if there were one thing I think we could do better as churches and as presbyteries and the denomination as a whole is, it's easier if someone who is in sin, someone who has, caused trouble, it's easier to let them quietly walk out the door than to start a discipline process against them. But all we're doing is harm to the church broadly then, because they can freely transfer as a member of good standing into another church. If it's, a teaching elder, transfer to another presbytery. If he's in good standing, there's nothing, outside of gossip, there's nothing to say why he shouldn't be transferred in when there's no prevailing discipline against the man or the woman. And in the case of a regular member, it's certainly not comfortable. It's not easy. It's not fun. But I don't think we need to be afraid to do the difficult things that God has called us to do. If we truly are connected churches, if we really believe Presbyterianism, it's in the best interest of our brother, of our sister churches to go the extra mile and to carry out the work of the church.
Yeah, I mean it's our duty. It comes with our ordination vows and the promises that we've made to the congregations that we're serving. When we do not follow through on properly administering church discipline, we are telling the sheep of our congregations, we'd really rather just take it easy on this one and let somebody else deal with the problem.
Yeah.
And that is a terrible testimony for any church court to give to the people that they are serving, and so it sucks. Church discipline is very rarely a spiritually edifying process. I think we've all been around long enough to know that, it very often goes sideways. But it's what God has called us to do. And it's going to take, consistency in the PCA, specifically with making sure that we put in the hard work that is associated with it. Yeah. And coming alongside and encouraging the men who do that work. We've had some commissions in South Texas dealing with judicial issues, and it can be easy to just forget that those men are serving in that capacity until they bring a report to Presbytery. And instead, we really need to be encouraging them and checking in on those guys that are putting in that hard work, because it really is a necessary action.
And especially when it is, I think, a teaching elder, and there's always the temptation if you have a teaching elder at your church who's questionable behavior, at best, at worst, there's something abusive going on. And then maybe the session, as an assistant pastor of the session, just says, well, we're going to dissolve your call. We don't like what's going on. We'll find somebody else. That's never sent to the presbytery. Nobody really knows.
Right.
That's, I think, where we're in really terrible waters, because maybe we're protecting our church, we think, but we're not protecting the broader church. He's still a member in good standing. And if there needs to be an investigation, you need to call the presbytery to investigate into his Christian character. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where it's really easy for us to just kind of send a teaching elder on his way, not have the hard conversations, but it is the duty of the presbyters to do that. It is our duty to protect the flock of Christ.
Well said. Do either of you know, in our sister denominations in NAPARC, do any other denominations have background check requirements or do anything towards this?
My understanding is no. I don't think that there are any NAPARC churches that have requirements for background checks in their books of church order. That may have changed, and
cursory looking I hadn't seen anything, but I didn't know if you were, familiar with anything or anything underway. But
no, if you watched the, I don't even know what podcast it was. I'm so embarrassed. Scott and Jared Nelson and those guys are going to be
Polity Matters.
Polity Matters.
You both were just recent guests on.
Out.
Yeah.
I hope they're not listening
Scott.
Now.
That's right.
So if you listened to my episode of Polity Matters, we had our game was name the NAPARC denomination,
right?
And I don't think I got a single one right. So asking me NAPARC questions is a bad idea in general.
That's funny. Well, that's one of the things my hope in this podcast is that obviously we the PCA dominate NAPARC, and certainly in the state of Texas, we dominate the Reformed scene. But it would be good but much better for us if we knew our OPC and ARP and RPCNA brothers, and to the extent that, the Korean, I've caught myself doing this, right? We totally ignore the Korean denominations in NAPARC that are right here in Texas. I've done that myself. We'd love to see the URC come plant here, as Jim Cassie and I talked about before. We don't know each other very well, and it would be good to see that we are in very close fellowship. We're not. They're not the main line, right? They're not the problem. They're our faithful sisters in Christ. And
amen. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, awesome. So you both have been busy making the podcast rounds, and I appreciate both of you spending some time with us this morning. Is there one thing, Jason, you'd like to leave us with before we go today?
Yeah, I think we need to think about, are we doing the best to shepherd the flock of Christ? And is this a way to improve that? I think that's the question that we need to be asking. Are we diligently looking into the background and the past of the men coming into our courts? And I think if we're not doing this, we probably aren't doing much at all. And so I really think this is an important step that we can all take to begin thinking diligently about that. So that's the question I think I would leave with, is just, are we actually shepherding the flock of Christ well by knowing the men coming to our presbyteries and sessions? Hopefully sessions probably more, but into our presbyteries, we often don't know the guy. He's brand new. And so do we know him well enough that we can commend him to our churches?
That's well said. And one of the things that has struck me, and I find myself guilty of this at a Presbyterian meeting, is the reluctance to say, candidate X, you may be a fine minister one day, but I can't vote for you today.
Right.
And we're very hesitant to say that in front of each other.
We are.
Yeah. Joshua, how about you?
I think for me, the thing I want us to take away, and I want specifically men who feel strongly about this and are in support of this overture, to realize that you can begin to communicate the value of your sheep in your local congregation now. You can begin to communicate that value of protecting them with or without this overture. Your actions, the policies of your church and your local churches remain yours to set, and nothing is stopping local churches from implementing background checks. Nothing is stopping local churches from mandating sexual abuse training for officers. We don't need to adopt the incorrect view that we saw last year, that because we failed GA and the PCA didn't care, we can't adopt the view that because we passed this overture, the PCA suddenly does care. And that's the only statement we can make. No, we can make statements starting this Sunday, starting next Sunday, starting at your next session meeting, taking the steps to communicate to your congregants. We care about your spiritual, emotional, psychological, and physical health. We want to put a foot down on abuse. We don't need to put something in the BCO to communicate that to the people in our churches.
Mm-hmm. That's well said. Yeah, we as the under shepherds in Christ Church, we have been given a charge to care for His flock, right, and to present our members as mature before the Lord, right, and to protect them from the wolves. And I think that's a great reminder from both of you. So thank you so much for coming on today and discussing this with me and our listeners. We will have links to both of these gentlemen in the show notes. The final versions of this overture as passed by South Texas and the Ohio Presbyterian are not published as of today as we record. I do have a draft from the South Texas Presbyterian website that I will put in the show notes today. And once the final versions are posted, I'll update the show notes and add those as well. Is your preliminary overture right now publicly available, Jason? Or
we've not made it available yet.
Okay.
No,
okay.
No,
fair enough.
But it should be soon.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, brothers, once again, thank you so much for coming on today, and hope you both have a blessed day. And we look forward to you, listener, tuning in next time. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys.